Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Louis Young. I'm the founder and CEO of Healthmetryx. And we have with us today Dr. Emmanuel Fombu. Dr. Fombu is an internationally recognized authority on the convergence of digital technologies in healthcare. He's an award-winning and best-selling author, physician, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and medical futurist with over 15 years of combined experience in clinical medicine, research, and leading healthcare organizations. Dr. Fombu's book, The Future of Healthcare, was selected by the National Library of Medicine and the NIH's All of Us research program as one of the top 3 books in digital health in 2020. Now, when we kick off today, I'm just going to start with a quote from Dr. Fombu, which is, real healthcare occurs outside of the doctor's office and hospitals, not when the patient shows up to make a complaint once their symptoms have developed. So as a scene setter for today, when we think about revolutionizing decentralized clinical trials, we need to think about the current state and the current status quo, which is the prevalence of high side effects and ineffective drugs, and thinking about the shifting paradigm to decentralized clinical trials and real-world data. And then thinking about the role of big data and artificial intelligence in the transformation of drug development, and then making better decisions for a healthier future. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Dr. Fombu, and we'll get today kicked off with our first question. Now, for all participants who are on the call, we're going to keep this conversational. So before we kick off, we want to know who our audience members are. So I see we have Sean Haney on the line. So Sean, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in today's session.
Hey, Louis, thanks so much. Great to see you. And thanks, Dr. Fombu, for today's presentation. Much appreciated. I am a pharmacist and lawyer by training. I've spent most of my career in the pharmaceutical industry and prior to that in hospital practice. And so really keen to hear some of your insights and perspective looking forward. I love that quote, Louis, that you kicked us off with in terms of the future of healthcare and where it really takes place. And keen to hear a little bit about those intersections and what you think is most important in the current dynamic today and this year, as there's so much change taking place across the spectrum of healthcare.
Awesome. I see we have Jeff Cook on the line. Jeff, you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you wanted to participate today.
Okay, good morning, Louis. Thanks. You can hear me all right?
I can hear you perfectly.
Awesome. Yeah, so my background, I've been in the pharma biotech industry for over 30 plus years, launching a lot of new products with upstart companies all the way back to Genentech, mid-80s, we'll say. And so as I've been involved with, just a lot of different new products coming to market and, various clinical trials, et cetera. And again, I was on more on the commercial side, but it was very important on the trial side, obviously, to get things to market as well as adding new indications. And then just really know that I've seen a lot of different modalities coming out, helping with different clinical trials with AI and other things. So, thought this would be a really good call to get on and see how things progress from there.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here today. And we also have Brendan Hines. Brendan, you popped on. You almost knew I was going to call on you. So let's hear it.
I had a sneaking suspicion. How are you, Louis?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, looking good, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so my background, I was an explosive breacher and counter IED technician with the Canadian military. And since being medically released due to injuries, I've been, I guess you could say, shooting my gate off. I like to call it advocating for veteran mental health and physical health. I did a lot of explosives work, a lot of explosive breaching instruction, especially in interior of buildings, moving from room to room, etc. And both overseas and domestically, and working with law enforcement, etc. The level of contamination that we saw in these in a lot of these environments is through the roof, and it's sort of shocking that we've only in recent years really come around to the risks that we're seeing. And the risks aren't just directly on respiratory, but there's neurotransmission risks due to poor respiratory health and respiratory infection from contaminants as well. So, it can affect your whole of body and whole of cognition system. So it is a critically important health and safety measure for our first responders and for our veterans.
Awesome. Greatly appreciate you being on it with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, buddy. My pleasure.
Brendan,
And
I was going to say that's great stuff. My son was Navy EOD, just got out, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, thanks. And thanks to your son.
thank you. And lastly, we have on the line Bruce Mulatto. Bruce, could you just quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll get things kicked off with Dr. Fombu.
Yeah, my video has been disabled. So my name is Bruce Mulatto. I'm in the advisory board of Healthmetryx in questions of AI. I've been advising the Canadian, South African governments and institutions in Switzerland on AI for public health. I myself, I'm a professor in physics, and I've worked with data and artificial intelligence for the past 20 years at the European lab CERN in Geneva, Switzerland.
Excellent. So, Manny, we have a full house today of subject matter experts in their domain that came to hear some of your thoughts and to share their insights for their industry. So we'll get things kicked off with our first question. And the question is, how do you see the role of real-world data in revolutionizing decentralized clinical trials? So you might have to break some definitions down for us, but we'd be glad to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Thanks, Louis. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining. I think if you look at the way research is done today, if you look at what's the relevance of real-world evidence, right, and what is the importance of decentralized clinical trials, it comes back to this exact same thing that I think Sean talked about, right? I think Bruce brought up Peter's expertise in that piece, is the idea that when we design studies today, because we look at p-values, which is probability of something being successful, that's what we use to anchor a lot of this research on to get approvals. When you do it, you need to have like the perfect population. So you pick, let's say you want to do a study on blood pressure to see if a drug works, right? Then you find basically the most ideal patients. So basically it's like picking the supermodels with the disease to actually do the test them in the lab setting. But then when that product gets approved by the FDA and you go to real world, you have to give that drug to everyone, right? Give it to everyone, any population that you do not study. Case in point, majority of people in clinical studies, especially minorities, are underrepresented in clinical trials. A lot of women are underrepresented in clinical trials, right? But then when drugs get approved, then everyone gets given to everyone. And so it becomes less effective on how we do things. So the ability to capture data in the real world setting is critical for how we advance medicine, not only because we identify the right patients for the right therapies, but also we get to learn a lot more around the environment. Like today, I just heard earlier some of our colleagues and friends on the call today talking about the environmental impacts from their own work-related activities, where it doesn't just stay exactly where they are. This is environment and the air is spread everywhere in the world, right? So we're all breathing this, and that's concerning and alarming. So having devices that could be able to pick up and measure these things are very critical for us on how we advance medicine.
Okay. That's great. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to add to that? Remember, we're keeping this conversational. So, in your experience, Dr. Fombu, what are the key challenges that decentralized trials face when it comes to collecting and analyzing real-world data?
Lawyers, we have Sean on the line, so I'm sure I'll attack lawyers. Right, Sean? I mean, you can jump in now, Sean, right? So tell me. So you have two kinds of lawyers in a particular space, right? So you have lawyers that make things possible, right? And then you have those that are just like, oh, no, you can't do it because it's HIPAA, you can't do this because it's that, right? And so I beg to challenge the question of what is real evidence data? What is healthcare data, right? Because there are many kind of healthcare data points, right? If I go to the grocery store and I use my credit card and I buy sugars and sodas and all that, is that not health data? You know exactly what that person is eating, right? Is it healthcare data only data that's in electronic medical records in hospitals? Or is it from wearables? Like how you define that means, and what are the privacy settings in the real world setting? Like what do you measure and when? Becomes a big challenge. That's one side, just make fun of Sean, but I love my lawyers, especially apples. But on the other side of it, I'll give it an interesting piece. If you look at the Apple Watch, for example, the Apple Watch can predict if you have an irregular heart rhythm or a stroke, right? So I designed that study and we took it to Apple, and now today see a lot of people using it. But initially, when we designed this study, no one cared about it, right? Oh no, it's crappy. Oh no, there's no one will care about this accuracy of it, probability of it being successful. But when we launched it, at the time it was only 50% accurate. So Bruce, you could probably relate to this too. I mean, you're the expert in this, so feel free to jump in and explain these predictive models and how machine learning plays a role to actually make this algorithms much better over time. So when we gave the watches out, at that time, that year, they had a Super Bowl in Seattle. Everybody remembers it. And so when they scored a touchdown, they had like 1,000 heart attacks taking place in the stadium. And so the rule became, oh, if you have all these people watching a football game and someone scores a Super Bowl and heart rates go up, it's not heart attacks, right? So you have to put it in context. So I think the challenges around that, how you take data and how you translate that data. And so I've challenged Bruce and Sean on this piece from a legal perspective. Sean, I'd like to hear your opinion as well. And then Bruce, from the AI kind of perspective, I think it'd be interesting to discuss how data, you could take initial data sets and how machine learning could help improve those data sets going forward, and the need for remote patient monitoring devices, the data sets that could make things better, which is what I think Louis is trying to solve that critical problem with Healthmetryx.
Sean?
Yeah, I love that. So I completely agree with you. There's two types of lawyers. There are the lawyers of go and the lawyers of no, right?
Yes.
And
I like that one.
What's that?
So I like that. I'll keep that. Let's trademark
that. Let's talk about that. So I think from my experience, especially in the business setting and the pharma setting, yes, it's a heavily regulated industry. Yes, you need to be able to meet those demands and those requirements, but that doesn't mean that you can't solve the problem. And so what's the problem? And if there's a barrier to solving it in one way, how do we help work around that barrier in an appropriate way to solve it in another way, right? And so it's all about, I think, mostly the mindset. What's the mindset from a legal perspective? You're not looking to break the rules. You're looking to help advance in a way that's consistent and aligned. And a lot of times it comes down to that mindset. How do we help the business? How do we help the client get there for the benefit of patients, right? Ultimately, that's where we're the aim. How do we do that from a patient perspective? I mean, all of the it's interesting in the legal space right now. You're seeing a lot of chatter around generative AI and how it's going to upend the space. I think, from my standpoint, it's a tool. It can be a vastly powerful tool to help then focus on where the real value is being driven, right? And so I think in a lot of ways, it comes down to that initial focus of mindset. How do we solve the problem? How do we get there? And if from a regulatory perspective, there are issues we need to navigate, okay, no problem. What are those issues? And then how do we help demonstrate that we can meet or exceed them early on to help bring others on board from a change management perspective?
Awesome. And then there was a second part to Manny's question that went to Bruce about AI models and how they improve in accuracy over time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I was worried about distance between me and the microphone. So I think to answer that question, we need to backtrack a little bit. And let's talk about why personalized medicine is so important and why the medical profession is going in that direction to really answer that question. So in the medical profession, and right now I'm advising a major medical school in the US at Emory University. Emory University now has decided to go in the direction of personalized medicine, big time, okay, across the board, not just for a particular disease or just for oncology, it's really across the board. And the fundamental reason for that is that trials are inherently biased in ways that whoever performs those trials don't even understand the source of the bias. That's a fundamental proposition that the medical profession is confronted with. So one way to go around that is either have trials with huge amount of subjects, which of course is impractical, or go in the direction of personalized medicine with artificial intelligence driving the analysis of the data. So for that, you really need to continuously or regularly monitor the individual and correlate the way the individual behaves from the medical standpoint, blood pressure and whatnot, oxygenation and things like that, and respond to risks that may emerge as a result of distress of the individual, to be able to early detect and so on and so forth. When it comes to oncology, you basically devise personalized ways to treat the patient, given on history of the person and similar people, in order to better inform the pathologist as to which way to go in terms of treating the person. So personalized medicine is basically becoming sort of like the center for the conversation in the medical/research profession, which really tries to address those issues. Now, does AI become better in time? Absolutely. And that's mathematically proven, but also from the point of view of the capacity of current algorithms to absorb data and improve their performance is very well understood. So yes, in time, algorithms become better, smarter, they're better to changing conditions, and they react better to deviations from the norm. As such, personalized medicine emerges as a means to monitor continuously an individual group of individuals to better assess a deviation from the norm.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. And Manny, what benefits do you see in using wearable data collection devices like, Healthmetryx's Clarinet or other devices in these decentralized clinical trials? And how can this real-time and comprehensive respiratory data contribute to the generation of robust real-world evidence?
Great question, Louis. I really like what Sean said and what Bruce, to follow up on that, and connect that to your question now, Louis. It's what we designed for the study that led to the Apple Watch predictive models for AFib. That study, we had 140 patients. That's it, right? The prior study had 10,000 patients. That took 7 years and $1.5 billion to get a drug into the market, right? We had 140 patients over a 6-month period. We have 41 years of longitudinal data sets using wearables, right? Massive data sets, smaller patient population, but more personalized, which is very unique to understand. So now when let's take in a chronic disease state. Today we have genomics medicine, and you could do a genomic sequencing piece, right? My mom lives in Maryland, and the work that was done in Maryland, Shady Grove Road, right on Research Boulevard, right? So areas, the research in Maryland, you see that the whole human genome is there. I mean, you could do a genetic code and actually understand what your risk of having. So if you know you have a risk for hypertension, risk for diabetes, risk for whatever it is that you know you have a risk for, you can actually track it over time, right? Or environmental risks could be another thing, right? We have examples today of toxins in the air and how polluted things could be. You can use wearable sensors, right, to actually monitor this environment around you. right? You can check oxygen levels, oxygen concentration, or the toxins in the air in real time. So that's what I like about it. It's about the idea of prediction, predictive models, right? Based on real-time data. So if you look at it in a simple way, it's like driving with Waze, right? Waze is actually a very good app, right, for navigation, to relate back to what we're trying to do here. When you're driving, if there's traffic, or there's an accident, it tells you to go left, to go right, right? That GPS kind of model in life, that's what we're trying to create here. But there's no one size fits all for everything. So I like, Louis, like what you guys are doing at Healthmetryx, where you're picking specific disease verticals, right? And you're being an expert in it and building your own devices and having all these things in, right? The whole models around it, the whole data sets around it, and the right patient populations to make sure that this is possible, right? So I think it's about the idea of personalized medicine, is the idea about creating a roadmap for us. So we're not just making blind decisions. There's no reason why anyone should be dying from heart attacks in today's world randomly, right? Or people should be getting random asthma attacks. We have all the sensors that you can actually monitor these things. There's no reason why people should be having like diabetes without monitoring it, right? Or even voice. If you look at mental health, for example, I know that's something that we talked about earlier. I think Bob brought that up as something that he cared about. We have done things where we could predict, especially out of Canada, actually out of Toronto, where you could predict suicide and depression based on voice, right? As a biomarker, right? Just having Alexa and things like that at home, when you're talking on the phone, you can collect those things. So these are data sets that has been used across multiple therapeutic areas and multiple disease areas. And so what I'm arguing here is that remote patient monitoring and decentralized trials is the way to go, right? You don't need to make this convenient for that patient. You can't expect people if you're not feeling well to then, oh, I have a headache, and then let me come back in and see the doctor. And then blah, blah, blah. People die in between these things, right? It's critical for us to make sure we're able to remotely monitor patients and then intervene before things get worse.
Okay. Now, thinking about these rapid advancements in AI, Bruce talked about algorithms getting smarter and smarter, and there seems to be this concern that I hear amongst doctors of, oh, we're getting replaced, right? We're getting replaced. In your book, you talked about humans and machines working together. So what does working together with artificial intelligence and AI and predictive models and wearables look like? And what does the future look like in terms of humanity's vision?
That's actually more interesting. So for those that don't know on the call, so Louis was my classmate in business school at Cornell, right? And we used to have these projects in class to work on things. And Louis would show up talking about artificial intelligence. And I thought the guy was crazy. Like, what is he talking about? Right? I didn't think about things from that perspective, right? Even about AI and what it could do. And so one day, outside of school, we seen outside, we had a break. I was talking to one of our other classmates that worked for Oracle. And he was telling me about coding and zeros and ones. And he explained to me the idea that you could search people using images. And I go, hold on, you could search using images. I had no idea about this. And I was like, what? Yeah, he told me. So then I realized that you could use MRIs, you could scan MRIs, X-rays, that algorithms could read these things, right? And there's a huge shortage of radiologists in the country. It's being outsourced. And I go, why don't you just train an algorithm to read these messages for you? That's what got me really passionate about the idea of what the capabilities are of artificial intelligence in medicine. So even as a doctor, I make an argument that if you could be replaced by an algorithm, yes, you should be replaced. The point of humanity is not to give you a job. Adapt, right? You adapt, we keep stepping. That's the point, right? So I learned about this. The first I heard about it was through Louis, right? So we learned about this. Then I took it in and said, oh, how do we apply it in my field, in my world? And so we applied it. Now I'm coming back the other way around. But Louis is also going back and saying, hey, how do you apply back in healthcare, right? Now we're back together talking about these things now together, right? So I think it's about opportunities and how we progress as humanity. It's not about having these debates about what's replaceable or not. Yeah, you get replaced, do something else. Maybe go golfing or something.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. If you can be replaced by an algorithm, you should be replaced.
Of course.
There's better things to do. And so to that point, what are the things that AI frees up doctors to do and do better that they wouldn't have time to do?
The first of the blog on guidelines. So for example, right now, if I Google any disease, probably 10,000 publications that took place today, right, on diabetes or hypertension. In different countries, different languages, in different places. People are learning things every day, in different chat groups, on Facebook, on Twitter, it is everywhere, right? Even mental health, people are posting things all over the place.
Yeah.
Lots of information. You can do sentiment analysis on these data sets, right? To understand what's happening, you can understand products, you can understand trends, you can understand risk factors. all these things are available today, but no one is actually using them to do anything with them, right? So I think there are lots of opportunities here. I think we have Bruce in here. I'm sure you can have a great perspective to add on that as well. But I think that there's a massive opportunities there, collecting the right data sets from the real world, doing the right analysis with experts in machine learning, artificial intelligence to make things better. So Bruce, your hand was up on that way. Go for it.
Sorry. So I just wanted to build on two issues that you raised, which are very, very important. First of all, there's two main groups of showcases for the use of AI. First, there isn't enough doctors in the world, period. Okay, so you do need AI algorithms to expedite diagnosis, filter people, determine gravity or severity of someone's condition. And we just don't have enough doctors. So it's not about replacing, it's about providing a service with a much wider footprint. I mean, that's the first group of showcases. The second group of showcases, and I'm gonna give you some example, is that doctors, they're humans and they have very limited ability to process data. The amount of data that a human can produce is simply huge. Let me give an example in Alzheimer's, okay? In order to determine whether a person will have Alzheimer's in 5, 10, or 15 years and what the outcomes are, require the processing of massive amount of neurological data that one individual would not be able to process, period. Okay, you need computers and AI to do that. One of the things that Emory is doing, they have actually an impressive data set of over 200,000 patients over the years, and they have sufficient information to develop models with which to establish whether a person is going to have Alzheimer's and when. An individual doctor cannot possibly process that data and come up with a diagnosis or predict or be ahead of the disease. Same thing applies with maybe biomarkers, as Manny was saying, when genomics come to the game and you have on the table, things become very complicated, okay? So there's many things that doctors cannot possibly process and arrive at a conclusion. And that's the second big showcase of AI, and hence Healthmetryx view in regard to developing large data sets is coming from.
Right, and thanks, Bruce. I agree with all those things. I'll just add another point here. I'm actually doing a project right now in Germany where we have these health systems. And by the way, Bruce, I'm an Emory guy, so I'm medical school out there. So I'm glad you worked with Emory with a good program there. But I think we're doing a clinical decision support program where we identify rare disease in patients with Fabry and Gaucher. These are diseases that are very common along the Jewish population. So we have with Maccabi in Israel, we're doing projects in Miracle in Mainz and Erlangen in Germany. We're using algorithms to find likelihood of patients having a disease, right? Because people with rare diseases, the symptoms seem like other conditions you have, like, right, depend on the disease. So it mimics the similar conditions, but you need multiple variables that the average clinician doesn't pick up. When people have these illnesses, it takes about 3 to 5 years to get diagnosed, right? From the time of onset. I think Sean, you were at Teva, so you probably know better insights about rare diseases here. It takes a while to get diagnosed. And so what we have is build algorithms with the electronic medical record systems to identify these patients, to flag them and say, hey, doctor, this patient I have a high likelihood of this, consider this, right? And it's the whole thing about rare disease, talk about zebra, right? Just because it looks like a zebra doesn't mean it's a zebra, right? It's that blur kind of element. So there's tons and tons of opportunities here. Anyone that argues against the use of artificial intelligence and data in healthcare is missing something clearly, because you cannot say, I don't want to make data to make an informed decision. You need data to make an informed decision, right? That's why the CIA exists. That's why the FBI exists. That's why the KGB exists. Everyone needs data, right? So that's what we need. So we need data in medicine so we can execute and make things better for us.
Excellent, excellent. And to that point of the transformative power of data, Manny, you and I were talking about how this could decentralized trials could have at scale, could have an impact on public health from a state government level. Could you talk a little bit about what that potential vision looks like and how disruptive the integration of wearables as well as artificial intelligence would be for how states actually care for their populations and the most vulnerable populations in their countries.
Exactly. Yes. So if you look at in Europe, for example, there's a public-private partnership group that focuses on healthcare, right? It's called H2O, which is helped by health outcomes research, right? Where, from a governmental perspective, if you look how much money is spent on the last few years of a patient's life with chronic disease, it's like the biggest expense in healthcare in the last couple of years of their lives, right? And so, as a government entity and from a public health perspective, your goal is to make sure you have a healthy population, and a population that is at least not that expensive for you to manage, right? So that's the right point. To do that, you need data sets, not only to measure and track them and say, oh, yes, I have this number of people with diabetes, but you also want to make sure that you're doing things to intervene. So, for example, we know that being in dark rooms, people get sadder, right? So how you design buildings becomes different. How you design cities becomes different, right? You want to make people highly stressed. You want to put more, even from an urban perspective, how you design cities, right? More trees, more relaxation places, more walking lanes, more biking lanes. All this information actually helps, right? Air quality. These are all things that cities and governments need to get insights on, right? On one perspective. The next part is you also have to understand what to invest in and what kind of partnerships you form with the private sector, right? So you could have a high risk, people could know and be aware. My family's from Cameroon, for example, in Central Africa, and I talked to doctors down there, and they have zero EHR, which means zero value because they have no data, right? They have no data. So how do I know how many people have cancer down there? How many people have, they're not accurate data sets, right? They don't have the right infrastructure in place. And so this summer, I'm actually planning to take a trip down to see what we can do to actually help capture these data sets and make it relevant. But I think from a real world evidence perspective, these are things that we need to get information on, right? From a WHO perspective, from a country perspective, this is not something that's just unique, just the US. That's what I like your approach as well, Louis. We talked about, like South Africa, for example, Brazil, in Chile, and all these places in Asia, right? So I think being able to collect these data sets helps from a global perspective, WHO piece on the country level, on the city level, and helps influence what happens in the future.
Excellent. I see that we have Dr. Andre Arnold on the call. He's a subject matter expert in wearables and the design of wearables and their application. Andre, if you could come off mute, introduce yourself, but also chime in on the capability of wearables to impact public health, public policy, and to derive insights from unique data sets.
Well, that's a great overview. The ability to do this work is really just a matter of making sure we have the right stakeholders in the room. It's very relationship driven, and that's really where I see what Louis is doing, and being upstream of a lot of those relationships is going to impact our ability to deploy it. The data sets, like everyone's been saying so far, Manny, you made some excellent observations. Our ability to link two data sets together, let alone three, to actually create information. The information side of it, again, those various 3- and 4-letter agencies Manny mentioned too, we're in a hybrid environment right now. The boundaries between those two spheres, between medicine and applied intelligence, they're very, very porous. Which means that the work that happens in the public health space right now is incredibly relevant, and that is transboundary. And the ability to distribute the kinds of studies that are necessary. The sample size can be small in some cases, but it also creates a bit of a surveillance capability where we can actually look for new forms of heinous discoveries, like oh my God, we didn't expect to connect those dots, and now we have something we have to act on. Probing this, doing it small, being agile, we're going to be able to actually act on this stuff very quickly, and it creates a bit of a magnet for intellectual property on the one hand, but it also becomes a resource for policymakers who know that they have to connect these dots. They need to get these basic stakeholders together in the same room. They can't afford to have huge studies and massive momentum to actually catalyze that. In this case, the kind of information and the kinds of models that you're describing, Louis, in terms of being able to build them off of, again, one basic platform, for example, that extends into other areas. The value of the information is very high. It's highly concentrated. Again, that's just more of a riff. I've got to run off to another meeting in a couple of minutes, but I really wanted to be able to be present with you guys. Did you have any more specific questions, Louis, that I can maybe respond to just for a minute?
No, well, Manny,
I got one for them, but actually, because on the sensor piece, is it true, if you look at step count as a thing from wearables, right? When I was doing real evidence study design, we found out that Fitbit has a different definition of actual step count, right? And Apple has a different activity of step count. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. And frankly, the hardware in all these cases is terrible. The problem is, as soon as you get into something more accurate, you're now going to be able to hypothetically begin to guess people's passwords better, or be able to actually diagnose a bunch of health conditions, or be able to actually do accident, not just detection, but actual prevention. As soon as you start to triangulate multiple types of basic sensors to get something more useful, you can do all kinds of really nefarious things with it. And some good ones too. I mean, there's a lot more good than ill to be done there, really. But the thing is we're bringing a lot of stakeholders to the table in a hybrid environment. And starting with the air we breathe and our physiology and a bunch of our basic metabolic engine, something like a step count, it's interesting, but you combine that device with maybe a couple different types of step counters using different mechanisms, each of them quite simple, and suddenly you have a really complex profile of a patient under multiple conditions. So we're really hitting way below the capabilities of our current technologies. We can do things with 70-year-old analog electronics right now that are going to cost us pennies to build, literally. But the thing is, it's a bit of an art to them, and you have to then get those analog signals into a system. But once you have a means of interpreting that data, you can do a lot with it. And even really low-cost simple systems can produce really exquisite actual data, and in some cases, actual real information. How we act on that? Again, I think the public health environment is really where it's going to make the biggest difference in the short term, but I think it has a huge impact for economic and security questions as well. From basic sensors, though. Basic sensors, you cross-correlate, begin to triangulate them. There's a reason why they're inaccurate right now. One is bad engineering decisions. Two, good sensors are a bigger problem than bad sensors.
Excellent.
To your point, Manny, you mentioned about the cost effectiveness. So how can the cost effectiveness of a decentralized clinical trial leveraging wearables compare to these astronomical CRO type studies? Is there going to be some disintermediation in the future that brings these prices down just to get the data and optimize?
Yes, I think if you look at even the cost, a lot of costs in clinical studies is because how long the study actually goes for, right? CROs get paid based on length of studies. A lot of them now, they make money by length, okay? And then about patient recruitment companies, there's a lot of that. And so there's a lot of business that doesn't support the progress that we're actually trying to talk about, right? Because the incentives are not aligned, right? Not every CRO, but mostly on the CRO side. And so the idea here is this: if we think different, in a sense, and from a CRO perspective, from a research perspective, is if you have fewer patients who get a drug to the market faster, right? So instead of waiting 7 years, 8 years to get a drug to the market, because you're trying to collect this data points, you can collect a lot more data points in a short amount of time, get a drug in the market way faster, years earlier. Now the question becomes, once you get that drug approved at that moment, that means your patent life is also long, right? Which means you can make more money in the long term, which then opens up that market piece to say, hey, these companies can sponsor real-world evidence research, right? Using decentralized clinical trials to capture more consumers or patients using the products in real time over a much longer period of time to get a lot more insights that helps them and allows them to generate more products and sell more in this particular space, right? You need to understand your market. And so I think what will happen is, I think you see things change where you see companies like Healthmetryx, for example, offering decentralized clinical trial solutions will help companies in phase 1, phase 2, phase 2, phase 3 studies. When they get approved, you still take over and study that patient population, the consumer in the real world, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily the clinical trial, but your consumer data is data points, right? And so the question becomes, what happens with those data sets? The challenge there, Louis, is the fact that this nonsense about p-values, which I would like to get Bruce's opinions about this, I mean, right? As an academic person, I think confidence intervals should be the way to go, right? If you want to study things in the real world evidence, I think p-values is archaic for us. The questions we're trying to ask is not the same question we're trying to get. What is the high likelihood of something being something in the real world, right? We're not trying to make an accurate 100% diagnosis, because even with p-values, you're still not 100% accurate. right? So if there's a high likelihood that something works, let's study those trends. And so the conversation now becomes, how does the FDA and the regulatory bodies look at that from the perspective, right? So I think maybe on Sean's side, from the legal perspective, or maybe on the regulatory part, I'd be interested to hear, how that matches what, from a data analysis point of the confidence interval kind of piece. I don't know, Bruce, if you could talk about that and p-values, and then maybe how that translates into regulatory bodies accepting other ways of looking at data and research, right? Why are we stuck to p-values, right? I don't think p-values is the way to go in this world.
Bruce?
Okay, so I mean, I think COVID-19 has been a major turning point in this conversation about big data sets, coordination of data sets, decentralization of data sets, unification of data sets, interoperability of data sets, and governance behind it. I mean, we learned the hard way in the middle of a crisis, okay, that the system of public health, private and public, were simply not ready to deal with a crisis just because there was no governance. Now we live in the post-COVID-19 world, and to Manny's point, you hear a lot of conversation about integrating data sets from different stakeholders. So I'm participant to the conversation in the Atlanta area, where different hospitals, state organizations, they're having conversations about uniting data sets, for the very simple reason that there isn't enough data to develop serious algorithms. There isn't enough data to establish differences between races. There isn't enough data to deal with biases unless you integrate data sets. So what, Manny's point is a way to somehow get there to really create these big data sets into the system. Let me give an example. So Emory is one of the biggest service providers in Atlanta. They serve about 1 million people a year. That sounds like a big number, but then only 10,000 of those are cancers, and only 1,000 of those are, for instance, breast cancer. So you only have 1,000 points a year, and over the decade, only 10,000. That's meager. So they themselves, being at the forefront of cancer research, they don't have data to develop detailed algorithms with which make predictions and all that, generate biases or understand biases and understand the response of different races to cancers and things like that. So they cannot answer basic questions. So it's very clear that the generation of very large data sets is absolutely paramount to take medicine to the next level. Being decentralized trials, one way of thinking of it.
Excellent, excellent. And on the legal side, Sean, Manny had a question for you as well. So would you be able to talk a little bit about what the regulatory regime will be looking like in the face of this huge demand for more data?
Yeah, thanks, Louis. I think on the p-value piece is an interesting question, and it's not one that I focused on before. So I'm actually going to dig into that a little bit more on my end and get back to you. I'd love to. It was actually, I wrote it down, Manny, after you highlighted it. I'm like, I love the way you articulated that. So I don't have a good answer for you in the moment. I do think what the drivers, though, are you're seeing, as Bruce highlighted here, just this massive opportunity space, not necessarily to challenge the way we work in an aggressive way, but to challenge it in an influential way. Say, look at the problems that we've had over the past several years from a data perspective. We can be so much further along for patients and demonstrate it as Andre had hit on earlier, in a smaller, more focused capacity to then move that forward. And then one of the possibilities may be, if it's confidence intervals over p-values, how do you demonstrate those trends in a smaller patient population or multiple patient populations from diverse groups to say, look at the trends we're seeing here. Yes, we recognize that it may not necessarily meet the criteria that for example, FDA has set for approvals today, but there's something here that is more than just chance. And how do we help be persuasive in creating new pathways?
Oh man, Brendan, I was just about to call on you.
Sean just answered the question actually, which is a great answer, Sean, and I like that the way you took that. And that's exactly what my question was around p-values, right? How do we shift things in a different way that benefits something? So, for example, we don't have to get a p-value to say if we have a mental health crisis, people are committing suicide, and people have massive depression. We don't have to get every drug to get a p-value that says this. We can study trends and say, hey, this likely works, right? And that's a confidence interval kind of question. There's a likelihood that it works, high likelihood. Right, got to adopt that, right? So,
Brendan, if you could, I know you have your question as well, but could you also talk about tying what we're doing for what we're discussing over to the first responder, military veteran community, and just discuss some of its applicability?
Yeah, actually, that's exactly the statement that I was going to make. This is, I love where this conversation is going. It's actually sort of above my intellectual capacity almost. I'm sort of, I'm amazed, and I'm kind of enthralled with some of the discussion that's happening here. I do think though that, like, while there's, I understand the difficulties in gathering a large enough data set to really define where risks are and to track health trends, et cetera. There is a great strategic gain to tactical victory, in that by focusing on smaller groups, we can gather enough data. We can really still move that ball forward without having a widespread representation of a demographic. If we were to focus, for example, I'll use this as an example. Look at the burn pit legislation that was passed in the United States. I mean, that's an earth-shattering legislation with health impacts and legislative impacts that are being seen around the world right now. And it will change healthcare for a large sector of the population. Now, they didn't go out and they haven't looked at a great deal of people's family backgrounds and genetic risk for disease, et cetera, et cetera. But they did have enough data to say that, look, this has exponentially increased risk for this set of people exposed to this set of problems in this type of environment. And that in itself is actually a massive gain for healthcare, because, once you've solved one part of a riddle, then other parts will start falling into place. And there's, while there's a lot to be said about creating these mega structures and programs and technologies to capture a very, very wide swath of the population, by segmenting it, there's also a lot to be gained, and you do away with a lot of those problems. There are accuracy issues, of course, but I think that it garners enough attention that it can really bring in protective requirements and translate into equipment. And really, when we're looking at healthcare data, I look at it because of my background. I look at it as it's actually a lot like any other battle that we have, where you can continue to gather intelligence and information, but at some point you have to say, okay, we have enough to move forward with our battle plan. So we can perfect it. But I say that quite often, good enough is good enough, whereas perfection is just a massive shame that nobody really notices. And I think that the 80% solution is generally enough of a solution to move forward. At least you're helping 80% of the problem. Because, when you try and be too exacting and too precise, you're sitting back, you're gathering information, and you're not taking that battle forward. So I completely agree and respect where the discussion is going. I do think, though, that with more targeted data, that can be the tipping point for an entire health movement.
I think so too, and that really ties into what we're trying to do with Healthmetryx and creating this capability that allows these unique communities to leverage the origination and the analysis for their unique purposes. And everybody helps everybody. Everybody's data helps everybody and moves the ball forward, and us collecting more data that helps us drive better decision-making and better outcomes. I have a quick question for Jeff Cook, who's been on the line. Jeff, could you talk a little bit about this capability that Manny, Bruce, Andre have been discussing with regard to how it could potentially impact markets as you've seen them from an investor perspective?
Well, I don't know as much as investment perspective as a commercialization person. As been on different calls with Louis and some of the conference calls. We're looking at we talked a lot about clinical trials, and there's an aspect there. Everybody's talking about getting the drug to market, and on the respiratory side, obviously, this could have a lot of capabilities of what they put as their endpoint of their studies. But the other thing I think where the boat might be missed a little bit is a lot, especially newer products coming to market, is what we call phase 4 post-marketing studies. And I think you could really capture, the real life data that, a lot of times the FDA will ask for a REMS project to approve a drug. And this could have some potential there of, what you put together as your REMS study. And then just for the market in general itself, as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking of different experiences that I've had, even in we'll say agriculture, these guys are breathing stuff every day. I'm doing a project that's involved with equine now. So I've been to, we'll say, conventions and meetings, and you're in these. I remember one, there was actually a company I was helping out, is they had an exhibit booth. And after 3 days, the dust on that table, when we pulled a television off and some of the marketing materials, I was like, holy crap, man, look at this. I'm wondering, all these people been in there, especially the people exhibiting, breathing this dust all weekend, what effect that has. And there's just so many tracks. I was thinking one of the other things that I made a note on is the advocacy groups, like for cystic fibrosis, we'll say, or other respiratory type groups. And I think that's an area to explore more, because when you get their attention and they see benefit, they get very loud very quickly. So, that's kind of my thoughts on everything there. And, again, we know the potential. It's just getting everybody else to understand and see the benefit and everything there, we'll say.
But Jeff, I think it's a challenge, Jeff, right? Because you can't get everyone to understand what you're saying. So, right? So there's this book called Crossing the Chasm about innovation and adoption. Right?
Yes.
And then you have your early adopters. So we have to admit the fact that we have us early adopters. So some of us, we don't need a crowd to be here. Okay, 11 of us are perfectly fine. We need to just believe in it ourselves. And then we say, let's solve the problem. Let's come together. What do we need to, right? Put our resources together.
Yes.
Get other early adopters and then prove the point. And then we know we have the late adopters, right? The people that are followers. So we are the leaders. That's why we're here talking about it, right? And so if you wait for everyone to get on board, no one will ever get on board. So it will never happen, right? If you need everyone to be there, there's no any idea that everyone loves the idea that everyone is there, right? So I think we just go grab the bull by the horn and make it happen, right?
And Manny, if you could just take us home with 2 minutes to go, wrap this thing up with some of your final thoughts on what we're trying to achieve and its impact, and where you see the future taking us.
If I first of all start out by saying I'm quite impressed by everyone that you pulled together. First of all, I think it was a great discussion among everyone, right? I like the openness of it and the discussions that we had. I think we have everyone here is an expert in domains and sharing ideas together. I think this could be something that we have more often throughout these conversations, because talks like this and discussions like this will get us to advance where we're going in healthcare, right? We have different networks. We need to come together. Your brother's keeper, right? Get it together, and I think we make things happen, right? So and it's great, right, to see people from different backgrounds and different touch points coming together, right, to make things more interesting for us. I think we have, just in Sean, there's a gazillion years of legal advice and piece to get there, right? You have Bruce, we have Jeff, Bob, right, Chia, right, we have Bruce, Andre, right, Anthony, like solid backgrounds with experts. So you pull together, and I'm quite impressed, my friend. I didn't think you could pull that. I didn't know you had friends other than me. That's good, right? I think what you do at Healthmetryx is fantastic. There's no silver lining or the perfect way to look at it, but I think together we'll make the future healthcare a reality.
Awesome. Well, we're wrapping up today, so I wanted to thank everyone for their participation, and we will be in touch next Tuesday for our next event, which will be The Future is Smoky, Are We Prepared? Thinking about the impact of some of these environmental exposures from climate change, compounding environmental exposures that are already happening from pollution and occupational exposures. So that'll be our next event, and you'll get an invite for it very soon. So thank you everybody for your time, and this was great. Take care.
Thank you very much, Louis.
Thank you.
Thanks, Louis.
Fair enough.